I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about licensure um, and what you need to do for licensure. Again, I know these things feel like they're a long ways away, but they're really not. And the important thing of thinking about this and talking about this right now is there are some important things that you can do to prepare yourself for licensure and to make this easier on yourself in the future. So that's my goal, is to kind of give you a general sense of what licensure is, how you should pursue it, and how you can do some things right now that might make it easier for you in the future. So you've all known me long enough at this point, and you can probably, without surprise, guess that the first thing that I'm going to tell you that you need to do always is to read the state regulations. Read them directly. You can get advice from other people, you can listen to that advice, but regulations change, sometimes quickly, sometimes not at all. But the board doesn't care whether your friend told you to do this, whether they had to do it this way. They don't care. They're going to ask that you follow their regulations. These are not exciting documents to read through. They take some time. Sit down, read them, make sure that you're complying with the regulations from the state. And they vary, as we'll talk about in a second, by state. So read them directly from the state licensing board first. So I'm going to talk to you about some of the general licensure requirements, and these really kind of cut across states. So almost every state that you go to apply for licensure, there will be some variation, if not exact replica of some of these requirements. And the first one, not surprisingly, are the educational requirements. Um, Typically coming from an APA accredited program will satisfy the educational requirements for most states. There are exceptions to this, and some states are particularly difficult. In our region in particular, New York State tends to be kind of a pain in the ass to some people. Just make sure that you read them directly. Some of it may involve contacting the DCT to indicate how you met this requirement or in what way you met this requirement. But for the most part, these should be pretty easy based on the fact that we're an APA accredited program. Secondly, and again, probably not surprisingly, there's the experiential requirements or the clinical hours that you need to accumulate for licensure. These again vary by state. And these, when I say things have changed quite rapidly, in probably the last 2 to 3 years, these have changed quite rapidly and continue to change across different states. It used to, some of this is the equity issue. So I can tell you, like when I was in Michigan, we had to do a two-year postdoc. That's why my postdoc was 2 years after we graduated. Other places you didn't have to do any postdoctoral hours. Other places it was one. I think one tends to be the typical. Whatever the case, there's some sort of experiential requirement that you can make. What's changed dramatically, and we'll get to this when we look at New Jersey specific, what's changed dramatically is that many states now don't require any of these to actually be postdoctoral. So in other words, the experiential requirements can often be met with the internship and practicum work that you've done prior to graduation. This is one where you're going to have to dig into the regulations and look at exactly what theirs are. But whatever the case, every state requires that there's some sort of experiential thing met and supervised by an appropriate supervisor. Then there's the examination, and there's generally 2 examinations that you're going to have to take. Yep, you're not done with exams after you finish your doctoral. The first one is the national exam, what's typically referred to as the EPPP, or the Examination for Professional Practice in Psychology. This is sponsored by the Association for the State and Provincial Psychology Boards, ASPPB. And I put a link in there so that you can, I would put that in your resources thing that you've started this semester, so that you can go look at this. This is a national exam that covers basically all of the information that you've learned in your studies. And there's some that aren't, like there's one in like IO and group. Well, we cover a little bit of group, but there's some stuff that you may not have ever actually learned in our program that you're going to have to study. So this does require studying. It does require your preparation for it. It is not an easy thing, but it is a very doable thing. Our students have done traditionally very well on the EPPP at this point. You'll hear some people talk, and there's a lot of controversy still. Right now, there was one EPPP. It was supposed to have taken place this year, where there was a second EPPP that was supposed to be more applied. There's been a lot of pushback, and right now that is still kind of not happening at the moment. But I won't go into that. We can talk about that in class if you want more. Then there's also the state and ethics exam, often referred to as the jurisprudence examination. So this requires your knowledge of specific state ethical and legal responsibilities that you have depending upon the state that you're applying to. There's, of course, fees. So every time you apply for licensure, you'll have to pay for a licensure fee. These fees typically are, there's the one-time application for licensure. There's the fee associated with the EPPP, and there's sometimes a fee associated with the state and ethics exam as well. So there's money. You might have to, as we'll talk about, you might have to do a criminal background check, and that will cost you money as well. So there is a financial investment in this, and then every year to 2 years when you renew your license, of course, there'll be fees associated with that too. And then there's just the paperwork. There's the application forms and other paperwork that you need to fill out, transcripts that you'll need to order to send to indicate what courses you've taken or not taken. Some places, almost every place, requires a criminal check, background check, and child endangerment. So this will indicate whether or not there's a criminal record that you have, and also whether or not there's been anything on file in terms of endangerment of children. New Jersey, for example, does a statement of good moral character. They actually ask you to submit 2 of these. I'm not sure how many other states have people endorsing your statement of good moral character. It's usually someone signing a letter that says, yeah, this person's okay. Rarely nowadays, but in some states they still do exist. I don't know how many off the top of my head, but some people might ask for a work sample. New Jersey historically has done like an in-person meeting and an evaluation where you meet with psychologists. They got rid of this a number of years ago. You can ask Dr. Angeloni. He's the last person I know of personally that had to take it. I didn't go through New Jersey because I didn't want to do that. It seemed ridiculous to me. But sometimes those things might be part of your application. So that's the general requirements. Those are things that you're likely to see in almost any licensure application, regardless of what state. So let's talk about some New Jersey specific requirements, or some of the things that you might specifically see within New Jersey. New Jersey, like a number of other states, has a temporary, let me see if I can highlight this. So they have like the temporary, anyways, a temporary license, and then they also have your permanent license. And these were at one point really important before they changed what constitutes a experiential requirement. So for example, when I applied, like you had to apply for a temporary license, and because all of the postdoctoral hours needed to be after your doctoral degree was awarded, like you apply for that license, you do supervised practice under somebody else's license, you accumulate your 2 years, and then you apply for licensure. Because those things have changed, I don't even know how many temporary licenses they're issuing at this point. But I just want to let you know it exists. If for some reason you need an additional hours post-doctoral, you may have to apply for a temporary license. And it's largely the same process. So you do everything that you would do for the licensure, except submit the hours, and then once you submit the hours, then you can go ahead with the permanent license. Again, I can answer questions about that when we're all together, but just to let you know that that exists in New Jersey and other states. Again, New Jersey does require the 2 years of supervised experience. That varies by state, but right now, as I mentioned already, excuse me, we're going to talk about this in a second. Most of those hours can be accrued pre-doctoral. I just included this because I was reading the statutes and I forgot that they asked, but New Jersey also asked for like a dissertation abstract, which is not a huge deal, but it's a little weird. And then I put the link to the New Jersey licensure state regulations, etc. here for you as well. So let's talk a little bit about the hours requirements and the experiential requirements for New Jersey. And these tend to be pretty specific, or I'm sorry, these tend to be pretty general across states. So I don't think you'll see a tremendous amount of variation when you go from one state to the other, but it could exist and it could be important. So New Jersey, for example, starts with you need 1,750 hours total per year. The difference if another state says 1,000 versus 1,750, like that's a big difference. So again, I'll reiterate, it's important for you to go to the exact regulations and to find out exactly how many hours they require in that particular state. The 1,750 hours for New Jersey are divided as such, as outlined on the slide. So 1,000 direct client contact hours, you're sitting in front of a client delivering direct services. 200 hours of supervision, and they divide this into 100 hours of face-to-face and 100 hours of group or individual supervision. And they also have this kind of in the fine print a little bit, the 1 hour of supervision per 5 hours of client contact. So in essence, they want to make sure that you're not seeing 40 clients and getting an hour of supervision. So all of those things would have to be documented on your application. And then there's the 550 other hours. I put that in quotations. I'm not sure if that's an exact quotation from the statutes, but it's basically what it is. So you can, note writing, clinical consultation, scoring tests, those types of things would count as other hours. So you're not with a supervisor, you're not seeing a client, all of those other things would count. It's not sitting in your office, playing solitaire, but it's obviously clinically related other hours. Now, as I mentioned before, and I'll highlight this part down here. There it is. Okay. As of 2020, so like I said, this seems recent to me. I guess it's 5 years ago. But all of these hours can be done prior to the degree being granted. So in other words, between your internship and your practicum hours, all of those hours could potentially count towards your New Jersey hours for licensure. And again, this is progressively true across different states. And what this means, that the weird part for me is that New Jersey has not been good, nor has Pennsylvania, at saying, how do you document these? They have a really good, clear way of documenting them if they're postdoctoral, but they don't have a very clear, in my opinion, way of documenting them before that. So this requires that you make sure that the pre-doctoral hours you're doing comply with New Jersey, Pennsylvania, or whatever other state you might want to practice in with their licensing laws. Generally, most practicum sites, most places are aware of this, but they're not necessarily, and so it's up to you at times to potentially bring up what's required. One of the areas, for example, I can tell you is most of the regulations say a supervisor can have no more than 5 students that they're supervising at a time. And some places may have more than that, just because they want to do more, or they may have staffage shortages or something like that. So that's just something that you will want to be aware of and make sure that when you go to submit these hours to the board, that the practicum site you're at is compliant with the licensing guidelines. And again, we can talk more about this when we're in person together, but that's just something important to note. In one of the general standards down here, that last one is that most states require that your supervisor has been licensed for at least 2 years in that particular state, or if they're out of state, the licensure is equivalent. And I have not seen people get hung up on this as to the equivalency. I think between where we're at in the Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York area, all of these have generally been equivalent. Not even generally, they've been equivalent. I've not had a student get um, tripped up on that yet, and don't expect them to be. So just a very brief like process timeline, and I always kind of forget about this a little bit. Um, I don't forget about the first one. You complete your degree and internship, right? Obviously, that's the first thing that you need to do. You get your required supervisory hours, as we mentioned. Hopefully, these all come pre-doctoral for all of you now. You then have to. This is these next two steps are the ones I always kind of flip in my head. You apply for licensure by the state, and you get approved to sit for the licensing exam. So that's important. I'll say that one more time. So once all of that is done, you apply for licensure from a particular state. That state will then approve you to take the exam, and that approval will be both for the EPPP as well as their jurisprudence exam. Once you do that, then you'll take, and look at how hopeful I am, you will take and pass the exams. And then they'll issue your licensure, your license, right? And then you're going to start making the big bucks, right? Obviously, the reminder here is you can't practice until your licensure is actually issued by the state. So there's a timestamp on that. If you start practicing prior to that timestamp, that's illegal, in short. So you want to make sure that prior to actually practicing that you're licensed. And if not, you're following the regulations of unlicensed practice, which generally means that you're being supervised. That's it, right? I think the big thing is to note that this does take some time, and some licensing boards are quicker at turning around things versus others. Um, so it's frustrating. I wish I had a better solution. Like, I don't just licensing boards tend to be overwhelmed. Some of them are better than others at turning things around, but there may be gaps in here. I think is the key thing to be aware of and to maybe expect. Hopefully you don't encounter those, but I might think about the possibility of those things happening. So as I've alluded to a number of times in this lecture, states differ. There is no universal licensing for psychologists. I think things have gotten better over the years, in that there's more consistency between states. As you might imagine, larger states, New York, California, Florida, for example, tend to be more difficult, which it really doesn't make sense. It's kind of a restriction of trade, in my humble opinion, but it is what it is. Other states that don't have the glut of psychologists tend to be more easy to kind of go through this process. Regardless of whether or not we want to complain about it, talk about it, change it, which I hope you all do, the important thing here is to note that licensure boards differ, and you need to know the licensure requirements of the particular state that you want to practice in. I'm going to do a separate lecture on reciprocity between states, because there is growing reciprocity between states, which has not happened in the past. The link I have here is a link to it's ASPPB, and they have a list of all of the licensing boards and a link directly to all of the requirements. So if you have a particular state that you're thinking you want to practice in or you want to move to, you can go and look at their licensure requirements and see how those might be different from New Jersey or Pennsylvania or Delaware that we've discussed so far. So I wish I could tell you all the differences. I think the big differences are um, the number of hours required for licensure. And then there's some differences in terms of educational requirements that pop up. Um, I think those are the two biggest ones between states. So again, I think I've covered this for the most part, but I thought it was important just to keep this slide in here to note that the variation that you might have between getting your degree and getting your license is highly dependent on your getting stuff in, getting forms in, like putting forms in as soon as you can, getting everything together, reviewing the statutes before you apply. And so the sooner you can get the board the relevant information, the sooner they can make a decision. As you may or may not know, boards typically meet like, every other week or sometimes once a month. So being aware of when the board meets is important to getting your stuff in before that board meeting. Getting transcripts in from the university, getting forms in from your supervisor, all those things can delay you because they're out of your control in some ways. And then the other biggest thing that varies is the number of hours required. And so ultimately, like the best estimate is that within 2 to 3 months of graduation, you've got a license. A longer estimate is a year after you graduate. I wish I could give you more specific details than that, but that would be my general sense, and the year being the longest. And that's just important. It's important to me for knowing, like, when am I going to start making better money and all those types of things. So again, we can talk more about that when we're together, but that's my general estimate.